Hello, I'm Stuart Pallister, former journalist and editor with media organizations such as CNBC based in Singapore. As a journalist, I covered politics, economics, and business in Asia for around 2 decades. And over the past 13 years, I've been working for major business schools such as INSEAD and NUS Business School in Singapore. Welcome to Leading Hospitality Through Turbulent Times. The series is entitled The World After 2020. The session will be a presentation of about an hour with 30 minutes for questions. We'll take some after about half an hour and the remaining questions at the end. We'll be taking written questions only, and you can submit these as we go along. And before we start, just a reminder that the session will be recorded and will be available on the Moodle platform afterwards. So without further ado, I'll hand over now to Professor Yves Schemeil, Emeritus Professor of Political Science at the University of Grenoble, specializing in global and comparative politics, to take us through the next session of his presentation on the world after 2020, which focuses today on the UN's body for promoting tourism. Professor Schemeil.
Thank you, Stuart. Hello, everyone. Welcome back for those who had the opportunity to attend the previous sessions. Well, we are going to focus on a number of organizations which is directly or indirectly connected to health and mobility issues and therefore are involved in hospitality business as well. To wrap up what we have so far learned, the world has always been unstable. So, I mean, people think that this crisis is terrible. It's a terrible event compared to events in the past. It's just because our memories are short and we are not always able to compare what is comparable. So that's one of the points I have addressed last time. Also, acute crises and turbulent times eventually lead to innovative decisions and new tools. We have seen a number of such tools like, early warning procedures and the protocols, a number of safety issues which are actually solved with the help of a number of texts consensually adopted, etc. So the problem is that if we assess that this crisis is not so particular, we need to understand what will be the impact of the crisis and how we can manage to prevent other crises or to adapt to their impact. So we have to discount the future, and to discount the future is complicated thing. I gave you quite a number of actually possibilities, like scenarios, like forecasting, like provision, and a number of other things like this. International institutions, of course, are there to anticipate what will come next, and they may help understanding how to face any new crisis, whatever it is, in health or in any other things. There are quite a number of issues, by the way. We have seen this last time. Now, this time, I'm going to focus on a number of organizations, among which the organizations that are dealing with the hospitality business. In particular, the UNWTO, which is not the WTO, World Trade Organization, non-UN, World Trade Organization, which is specialized in free and fair trade. It's the organization associated to the UN, which focuses especially on the tourist issue. And there are other organizations which are private and reflecting the concern coming from the business about hospitality issues and try to lobby in the forums in which the World WTO and others are, the UNWTO and others are involved. If you look at mobility, first, there is a very large network of IOs. I mean, the things that we have probably now underlined in the first sessions was that international organizations matter, but they matter because they are constituting networks. I mean, you may, for example, discard the decisions made in one forum, for example, the WHO or the WTO or others, but it's really uneasy to absolutely disregard whatever comes from a bunch of organizations working together. So let's start with this one, the UNWTO. The headquarters are in Madrid, and you immediately see that there is a problem because they are so poorly funded. 25 millions, it's quite nothing, actually. I mean, what we can do is this. The French transportation railway company is going to lose $35 billion this year, possibly. So, we are in quite a different type of scale. But with this very tiny amount of money, which should be actually increased, because you have to consider that people who work for the organization are actually paid for by the countries which send them to the organization. So, for example, Switzerland is a member of this organization, and they send staff people, and these people are paid by the government in Bern. So they are focusing on what? They are focusing on tourism, of course, broadly speaking, but especially sustainable tourism. I mean, that's the important thing, because they are connected to the agenda of the UN, which is the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal 2030 agenda. So they work on pollution, for example. If you have touristic activities, then you should avoid to pollute the places you visit. They are also concerned with protecting the cultural heritage of the country. It's an attraction, but also a problem. And they're also focusing on ethical tourism. Well, ethical tourism means that, for example, you will not go to a country in which there is a concern for, a focus on sex activities, and people are going there especially to enjoy this very particular type of service offered. But it's also about the fact that children should not work because they are protected by the International Labour Organization and its laws, etc. It's a weak organization, first because implementing its decision is very, very difficult. I mean, that's a problem that we have addressed, because there were questions from students about how IOs would be able to enforce their resolutions, whereas the states are still there and controlling their activities and being the only sovereigns or the ultimate sovereigns, etc. Well, my answer was that, in the end, eventually all these organizations are complementing each other, they are working together, and at some point, some of them reach a stage where they have some sort of an arbitrage system or a dispute settlement mechanism, or ways to compel their members to behave according to their commitments. Still, in the realm of hospitality, there is very little implementation rate, very low implementation rate of the decisions made, which are more or less recommendations. So it's an underdeveloped section of the UN activities, and about hospitality and tourism and mobility and, of course, health. They play a role which is probably much lower than the role they could play in the future. So it's just the very beginning, actually. They also are facing intercultural constraints. That means that, it's very delicate to address some issues like children labor, like gender balance, like the possibility not to harm people who have religious beliefs, etc. And so this, of course, is putting some stress on the deliberations at headquarters in Madrid. They also have, as any other organization, they have issued a number of drafts about the current crisis. And this is just an excerpt of one of the latest one. Tourism must be recognized as a key pillar for building a better future in all world regions. Past recoveries remember what I've just said previously about the fact that this crisis were repeated time after time. Past recoveries prove that the importance of our sector cannot be overstated. Well, that's more or less Washington speaking. We don't even actually know exactly what they have in mind when they say this, but the idea that the recovery is coming. So keep confidence in our capacity to settle these critical times. The UNWTO is of course an imbalance, and as you see here, or probably difficult to see in detail, but I mean the main lesson to draw from this is that there are countries which matter much more than they should according to their weight on the world map, and the size of their population, and even the size of their tourism. Although we all know that Spain is one of the top destinations of people in the world. And so you see Spain, because also the headquarters are in Madrid, but Morocco, before just one step before Spain, and China, because it's really too big to be ignored in matter of tourism. And there are quite a number of people who travel there and from there. So they receive a number of supports and fundings from the agency. So it's an agency which works for everyone, even the United Arab Emirates, for example, or Bulgaria, Saudi Arabia, etc., and Papua and New Guinea. But some countries are more equal than all the others. Now, if we turn to food, which is of course related to tourism because of restaurants, hotels, and whatsoever, and also because you wouldn't visit a place where people are starving. So we also find a network of international organizations, and that's quite unexpected because in the mind of a number of people, there is the FAO and there is the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, whose headquarters are in Rome, is working hard to establish from the very beginning, food sovereignty. That means that every country should be able to control its supply chain of food and be able, for example, to ban some exports in strategic sectors and be privileged in importing other very strategic seeds or staples or goods, elaborated goods, etc. So the FAO is, of course, one of the major organizations in the field of food, but it just addresses the issue of food sovereignty. Now, the World Food Programme, which was actually conceived as a way to face emergencies, like when people are suddenly starving somewhere because of a drought, etc. That's about food availability. So if you don't have food and you cannot feed your people, then the World Food Programme would come and rescue you. But there are other organizations which are less understandable, even if you look at the names of these organizations or these activities which have a special status within the FAO or next to the FAO. The Codex Alimentarius, for example, I'll come back to what that means exactly, but it's about food edibility. What you eat should not poison you, and that's also the case of what you drink. And my favorite, the HACCP, Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. That's about food safety. When you have something which arrives in your plate, it should be safe to eat it. It's not only about the edibility, because you can have an edible food which is help to you, but by whether in a restaurant. But fortunately, it has passed. It's sold selling by date, or there had been sometime a problem of defreezing the component of the meal, etc. And so this is an interesting adventure. Actually, it was really an adventure, because when the NASA wanted to send astronauts very far away in the space, in the outer space, they wanted to make sure that whatever they would have as food or meals would be healthy. And so they found out that there were a number of points, some of them being critical, to control if you don't want to risk being poisoned by the very food which was put charged in the satellite in which you are going to reach the moon or the space station. The Codex Alimentarius is setting international food standards. So you don't know that. Of course, we all ignore that there is an organization called Codex Alimentarius, and of course, we also ignore that this organization is intervening in every type of food that we can eat or drink. So the food standards mean that you cannot produce edible food in any context, in any type of situation. You have to respect a number of standards, otherwise you are at risk. So the Codex is a code in which you find quite a number of food items which are considered as safe, provided that some conditions to deliver these food items are respected. And it's like a big dictionary, and this dictionary is made and is improved and updated, not every day, but probably every month or 2 months in Rome. You read this later to give you a much clearer idea of what this Codex Alimentarius is and why it is called that way. So I skip it by now. And I come to transportation. So after food, there is another thing which matters a lot for tourism, hospitality, etc., hotels, which is how do you transport people from one point to another. And here you must have in mind again that there are quite a number of organizations which work together, more or less, like the International Maritime Organization, IMO, the World Customs Organization, less expected here, WCO, the ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, more famous in French because it's in Montreal and they are very eager at showing that they respect the Francophonie, so they say OACI. The IATA, International Transport Association, which is the lobby of the business, like the carriers and the industry which is involved, like Boeing, Airbus, etc. And there are a number of business organizations which try to put some pressure on the decision-making bodies of each state and also on whatever can be earned by trying to be introduced into the World Tourism Organization or other, the International Civil Aviation Organization, etc. So I just have some examples here listed on this slide, but there are quite a number, and also they change names because from time to time they revise their perimeter. There are new members, other members abandon one of the existing bodies to reach join another one. But here it's, I would say, the most updated type of lists I could find about this sort of businesses oriented towards lobbying about measures which would be favorable to hotel and restaurants worldwide. Now let's go in depth and see how does it work at the level of, for example, the International Maritime Organization. Well, this organization is again not very famous. Probably most of you haven't heard of it before this morning. It has its headquarters in London, and it's really the heir of a great history, because you know the West Indies company and everything which was necessary to reach the the continents which had been discovered after Columbus reached the coast of the Americas. All this is part of the history of the IMO, because there were a number of treaties on how to how to sail on the seas, how to be protected against piracy, etc. I mean, it's the aggregation of all these conventions, agreements, and treaties that, in long run, made after 1945 room for an organization which would be called International Maritime Organization. But it took time for this organization to be able to start its operation, probably 10 years, and it became effective after a tragedy, which is the Torrey Canyon disaster of 1967, because here is a type of crisis that raises concerns such as never again, but how to prevent such a tragedy to occur in the future. So this is exactly what the IMO is for. So here are a number of dates which are important, but the most important thing is that there is an international convention for the prevention of pollution from ships, and there is a global maritime distress and safety system. These are the tools, that's the legal and the technical tools that are very useful for the IMO and for the states which are members of this international organization in order to regulate or to monitor the maritime traffic. But this is not an isolated organization. It's part of a larger network which works against piracy, trafficking, and of course pollution, etc. And you have a list on the right banner. It's actively collaborating with a number of bodies, especially during the 2015 refugee crisis, the Syrian refugee crisis, because people in London said, well, they are migrants or refugees trying to find asylum in Europe, in Western Europe, coming from Syria, on the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey, etc. This, of course, is a concern for the refugee organization and the migrants organization, like the UNHCR on the one hand and the International Organization for Migration on the other hand. But how come the International Maritime Organization could be counted in at the time of this crisis? Just because there were people who were drowned on their way to the Italian or Greek coast. And of course, that's within the mandate of the IMO. So they actually took the lead, convened a big conference in London, and all these organizations like the UNHCR and the IMO, migrant organization, etc. They all, and the European ones, the Office of the United Nations for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and its European equivalent, they attended the conference in London with a lot of goodwill, and they accepted the sort of paramount monitoring of the International Maritime Organization because it was a problem at sea. Now, if you look at the impact of the IMO on mobility and tourism, it's really a very large one. First, I mean, if you are looking for supply chains, you want to have a safe supply chain. You want to make sure that whatever you order abroad is going to, or far away, is going to sail to your restaurant or your hotel or your supermarkets, etc. in time. And then you need to have one institution which is watching over supply chains. Of course, cruises, harbors and their facilities, and even beaches and their cleanness is also one of the things on which the IMO is supposed to work hard. And actually they do. And it's in the interest of a number of their members, because nobody wants to have one of these famous beaches which attract a lot of tourists polluted with waste and plastics. And I come back to these plastic issues at a later point. It's a multifunction organization which does a number of things and protects first seafarers. That's actually the logical of its history. The idea was the rationale behind establishing such an organization was that there were seafarers. They were sailing to very remote places for a long period of times, like months. And of course, the risks were high that they wouldn't come back in good condition or come back at all. Same with the cargoes. And then progressively, the organization of the time, which became the IMO eventually, were addressing the issue of the safety of passengers and tourists, and the capabilities of the, for example, harbor authorities to welcome tourists when they land somewhere for a day or two, etc. But they also deal with coast. The coastal territories, which are actually threatened by the pollution of sewage system, illegal sewage system, even legal one, which are not safe enough, and endangered maritime zones. They have a polar program, for example, which is nice because they started with protecting sailors and boats, and now they are mainly addressing an issue that nobody else does. Actually, monitor, which is I would say how far you can make sure that polar coasts and polar seas are protected against the pollution from ships and from passengers and from tourists, and probably from offshore platforms, which is another part of the issue to which they moved recently. So they are, as any international organization, remember what we said, they are making norms. Their mission is to encourage and facilitate the adoption of the highest practicable standards. Highest practicable standards. It's good because you are looking for the best, but also it has to be, you have to be realistic. And they are looking for safety and efficiency of navigation, and prevention of marine pollution from ships. That's the mission, the overall objective. So that ship operators, whoever they are, cannot address the financial issue by simply compromising on safety. Now, that's the issue. I mean, you should make probably some cuts in your expenses by making compromise on safety issues. But security, because you don't have people, for example, who are able to protect the passengers and are armed, security. And you could also have people who try to make money out of wasting the environment and the seas for their to stick to their business plan. And so this is prohibited. Yeah, I hear Stuart probably. No.
Yeah, there are a few questions that have come in. They're all pretty interesting. Maybe first the IMO, because you'd be just talking about that. So one of the questions is, what would be the IMO's role in cruises being widely affected by coronavirus? Well, we saw the Diamond Princess, the issues that they had there, where it ended up being moored outside off near Tokyo, I think. And other cruise liners that have been affected, with passengers being held on board, having to self-isolate and being in quarantine. So what's the IMO's role there with those sort of cruise ships?
Okay, IMO is concerned with every sort of passenger ship, whether you just cross the Atlantic or the Pacific or the Indian Ocean to go from one harbor to another, or if you do this because it's a leisure trip and it's organized in this type of cruise ships that are so huge by now. So they are concerned with safety of this ship, as any other ship. If you're looking for a tanker, for example, it's the same thing. They don't make a difference. But here, the difference comes from the fact that there are quite a number of people boarding these ships, and so it becomes a greater issue and a bigger problem. And so, if you look at the website, you see that they have a specific discussion of this issue. I can go. I could send you the link, but if you go to IMO cruises, for example, as keywords, you find it easily on Google. And that means that when there is an epidemic on board, it's exactly as any other threat, like piracy or terrorism, or there is a risk of wreckage because of the insecure navigation of a drunk captain or whatsoever. I mean, it's the same type of issue. They have to address this seriously. It's not because it's about people who pay for having fun. It's exactly as any other type of passenger. So
suppose that you mentioned there about a cruise ship that had overturned. There was the issue of the cruise ship in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
Where there were various issues and whether the captain was at fault and so on. So that would be in terms of the structure of the ship. Whereas I suppose with coronavirus, it would be down to the World Health Organization in terms of the guidelines they're issuing.
Yeah, but they also deal with health, safety, and medical care as well, because as you know, in such boats you have or ships, you have most of the time an emergency room, and you can do surgery, and you also have a quarantine space when people are ill and before you reach the next harbor. So there is a recent amendment to their security drafts, and there are at least 6 points in which they say a number of things about, for example, evacuation. I can read the last one for you. They set the time for orderly evacuation and abandonment, including requirements for the essential systems that must remain operational in case any one main vertical zone is unserviceable due to fire. That's in case of fire. But there is another one in case of health. Oh, well, mainly they say that what works with fire should work with virus. That means that you have a number of procedures that you should apply when you are in an emergency, whatever the cause of the emergency is. And so you just have to replicate the instructions that have been embodied by the people who are trained to do this.
Okay, and the other part of the question was that what's the IMO doing about environmental issues regarding pollution from cruise liners?
There is an international convention against the pollution at sea. So that means that ships are very much controlled by not only the IMO, but the organizations and the governments which have to help it in monitoring what happens at sea. So when a boat somewhere is releasing some waste or oil and fuel, actually, but waste, garbage, and etc., whatever, then they have a system of satellite control, and they will know eventually, probably not immediately, but after some delay, and there will be, that's for sure. So they have some leverage, and the proof that they have such a leverage is that the catastrophes of the size of the Torrey Canyon, for example, are rare today. Not to say that nothing of the kind of this scale happened for a number of years.
Mm. There were a couple of other questions about the UNWTO as to whether it's going to have to change any of its policies regarding environmental conservation for tourism, for the tourism industry, after seeing, what we've seen in terms of a rapid improvement in the environment, in terms of blue skies and so on. Do you think that's going to be the case?
Well, they are very much concerned with the problems that make unlikely that people would visit a place because it's too much polluted. There is this idea that you can now see how Delhi looks like normal times, whereas usually you can't. You can't because there is too much air pollution in such a big city. So of course they are concerned with the quality of the air. They are concerned with the fact that when you spend some time abroad, you are not going to be impacted by irritating pollutants or whatsoever. But because of most of the sovereign states which are members of this organization, because they are members of the United Nations, are watching out the possibility of any interference from any other states on their capability to regulate their own system of quality of the air, or the safety of the tourists, etc. It's a little difficult for such a nascent organization, which is so underfunded and understaffed, etc., to overcome the reluctances of the government, and so it will take time. But it's clearly they are clearly oriented towards the right direction, because it's again in the interest of any stakeholder to make sure that when you visit Delhi, for example, you can enjoy your journey and you will not be sick at the end of the day or at the end of your trip.
I suppose they can only really issue guidelines, right?
That's what they do. They issue guidelines.
Countries follow them. That's up to them.
Well, sometimes, most of the time, they say they will follow these guidelines. I mean, because they voted for these guidelines. That's the first point. I mean, they were meeting somewhere, and probably in Madrid at some point. Then they had these big discussions about what the guidelines should be as far as the quality of the air is concerned, for example. And then they come with a resolution, and so they are supposed to implement this resolution in their own countries. Whereas, of course, then there are administrations which are in charge of this, and there is the control of the parliament, and must adapt the legal system, etc. So it will take a lot of time, and there will be a number of barriers to be actually overcome before you reach a stage where the international resolutions is implemented. That's completely different from what happens at the level of the other WTO, which is the World Trade Organization, because there they have a court which settles the issues between the contending countries, and in the end make sanctions at a certain amount of sanctions for a certain period of time possible, and authorize this sanction and authorize a return to deregulation of the trade system, which was negotiated in the precincts in Geneva for decades, because there is some sort of an aggression by one state or two states against the others. That's different. So here in the tourist sector, you don't have anything of the kind. I mean, there is no possibility to make resolutions enforced if the state don't want to do this. But the fact that they can be named and shamed by others, or that the business companies can just refer to these guidelines and say, you don't respect the guidelines, and then we are in the private sector, we are suffering from that. That may be also a good way to make things improve.
There's another question about the UNWTO as to what role it's playing during the pandemic, and what sort of role you expect they will have to play after the pandemic's over?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because you know what they do now is they issue statements, they write down drafts, they are giving interviews. There is a statement from the Secretary General, quite a number of statements. Actually, it's rather smart. But the basics behind this is that, well, I am the Secretary General of the UNWTO. What I can tell you about this, I'm very much concerned. It's something which is really impacting our business and the quality of life of most people in the world. So because we are supported by 193 states, we need to do something as far as we can, so as soon as the crisis is over. So what else they could say?
There's a follow-up question about what sort of repercussions can the companies who are damaging the environment face? You talked about naming and shaming countries, but what about private companies? And within hospitality, it's predominantly, you know, private companies, private industry.
Okay, I'll come back to that later in this session or the next. I don't remember, but I will address this. Yeah, so I skip it.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you want to proceed with the
I proceed. Okay, thank you, Stuart. I'll proceed. Thank you very much. Here we come to public and private organization. Well, you know, they are collaborating again willy-nilly to frame hospitality standards, because the idea is that there is some sort of a race to the top to be the first or the leading stakeholder in the process of reaching a stage where better standards are set and of course respected if possible. You have always to be realistic about that. So these better standards are well known by now. I mean, nobody would contest that we are looking for sustainability, equal opportunity, decent working conditions, fair taxation of the digital economy, for example, and fighting unfair business practices. That's what everyone considers as being taken for granted. It should be taken for granted. Now, what this being said, a number of stakeholders just observe that you can commit yourself to the standard. You can think that the guidelines stemming from the standard are very instructive and should be implemented or followed. And then in the end, you can also say, I have some good motivation not to implement this standard now. I mean, I need the delay. And that's, of course, what most stakeholders do, be they governments, sometimes international organizations themselves, or bureau within these organizations, and of course, most of the time, the businesses which are operating in the sector. They find good justification to postpone the implementation of the decision to which they subscribe. So they endorse the decision at the same time they say, well, but not for me, not now. And that means that in the end, you never know how long it will take in a special field or sector or region of the world to reach a point where most stakeholders, not all of them, but most stakeholders will converge and apply these better standards. But these standards are now very well known. And so that means that if you start opening a business somewhere in the hospitality field, whatever it is, then among the questions that you have ask yourself before starting, these questions will be raised. What can I do about sustainability? What can I do about food waste? Well, you cannot open a supermarket by now if you don't have a protocol about the food waste, especially when you're very respectful of selling by dates, etc. So you want to sell fresh things, but you also have to probably throw out a number of garbage, which are still edible and actually fresh for a couple of days or a couple of hours at the very least. So now there are, of course, protocols or customs, uses, laws, or whatever you can call them, in a number of countries where the supermarkets owners negotiate with, for example, NGOs in order to give them the extra food that's going to be lost at the end of a day or at the end of a week, in order to redistribute it to who need it, to the poor. But that also happens at the level of people who cook, either in a restaurant or home. Because if you cook home and you waste a number of vegetables because you forgot them in the fridge, well, it's a shame. And so you'll be named and shamed by others. Your guests, for example, your friends, your family, and if it's in a restaurant, a journalist who is specialized in tracking whoever is actually disrespectful of this rule. And well, trans fat, for example, yeah, well, it's going to disappear probably from the composition of a number of goods that people think are they can eat easily, which won't be the case probably in the future. But there are also visa attribution procedures, which means that if you want tourism to be sustainable, you have to find ways to facilitate visa obtention when people want to visit your country. So there are negotiations which are endorsed and supported actually by the World Tourism Organization, but also by an organization that we're going to meet in a minute, which is the World Customs Organization, because this is a matter of transit across borders. So you see that it's a matter of jointly producing guideline, norms, standards, benchmarks, and in the end, respecting these new standards, but not anyone or everyone at the same time. It might take longer for some people or some countries or some regions or some sectors to do this. Now, in the mobility field, there are other organizations like the International Civil Aviation Organization, whose headquarters are in Montreal, as I said. It's again a UN specialized agency, as the FAO, as the World Tourism Organization. It was born in 1944 with as the main administrator of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, which was signed in Chicago. So the Chicago Convention needed at the time a body, an institutional body, to make it live and be maintained in the long run and be improved and implemented by all stakeholders. What does the ICAO do is to try to reach consensus on standards and recommended practices, which in their jargon is a SARP, and they have over 12,000 sorts of SARPs in a number of fields. They also promote procedures for air navigation, the bans. So yeah, they deal with SARPs and bans. It's completely non-understandable by rank and file people as we are, but for them it's really meaningful, because this is how they can measure the level of activity they have in their field and how actually meaningful they could be for their members. They do so. They make norms. Their activity is to audit state civil aviation institution and their oversight capabilities to check that safety and security issues are respected according to these famous SAPs and bans. They also have a vision, which they make public, and they underline as being, some sort of a very fair motivation, and which gives them some self-esteem. achieve the sustainable growth of the global civil aviation system. So you should grow because it's about the economy, but at the same time it should be sustainable. So in the end, you should have probably electrically propelled planes with hundreds of people boarding these planes, which we are very far from that, of course. They have also an objective, harmonized global aviation safety and efficiency, both in the air and on the ground, which means that airports, of course, are a target of their activity as well. So it's not only about planes, it's also about airports. It's not only about flight, it's also about whatever happens in the on the ground, because this is where passengers board and of course the pilots and flight attendants, etc. But also everyone working to make this possible is concerned with the decision made at the level of the ICAO. And they, among their main goals, one is particularly interesting, is they further improve aviation successful safety performance. So they have some sort of a standard scale to measure how consistent you are with the best possible sort of safety measures. And so you have a score, your performance is assessed, and that also is a way to make room for naming and shaming. If a carrier is not successful enough in this sort of safety quest, then eventually it will suffer from the feedback and it will backfire at some point. Then you cannot say that you are very much concerned with safety issues as a carrier, and at the same time not respecting some of them which are very important for a long period of time. The current crisis, we come to it, of course, has a great impact on civil aviation, as we all know. So what they do? Well, I mentioned drafts and mentioned interviews, statements by SGs, etc. Here they organize what they call stock-taking webinar series. So that means that they cannot meet, of course, so they meet virtually, as we do now. And these webinars are supposed to people to help their members to take stock on the current knowledge of what is the problem exactly, and what we can do to address it. So they published very recently a handbook, which will be out very soon, a handbook for on the management of safety risk related to the COVID, which will provide new guidance for the members. So members turn to the ICAO and said, well, what could we do? And then they say, all right, we try to collect information coming from various sectors, including, of course, people who are in the health field. And we come out with new guidance and new guidelines. And then they know that they have to keep the highest possible levels of aviation safety. And at the same time, they want to maintain the continuity of critical operation. So this is contradictory. I mean, if among the risks that are threatening aviation safety, you have the virus, then you should, of course, limit the operations. But possibly, if you say critical operations are maintained only, well, then what will come out from these guidelines in the next month? And shall we resume the other operations which are less critical, less essential? We don't know. But this is the first step towards saying that we should do something for you. So you see that quite a number of international organizations actually are doing just this before trying to make resolutions, make norms, and try to make these norms enforced by the implementation of their policies, etc. They first collect information from all members. They try to find out who are the best experts in the field. They have the capability and the capacity to make these people react to their demands for more or tailor-made type of assessment of what is important in their own sector, and then in the end they can come out with some sort of a book of a list of recommendation for their members. But that's already a step towards doing better, which is making norms. So it's just assessing risk and showing that there are ways to solve this risk, or to face this risk actually, and there are solutions. And then they move ahead and ahead and ahead, and in the end you could have something like, you know, some sort of regulation saying that if there is a pandemic, then flights, you could not have flights beyond the critical number of routes and flights that are needed to convey the number of essential goods and services that are much needed in a time of crisis. This is something I'm going to skip, but this is how the next, this is a series, a current series of seminars that they have organized since April 30, and there are others to come, and you may see, if you look at it carefully, after this session, that they mean business, actually. It's probably very helpful for their members. Now, an organization which, again, probably very few people know exactly what they do, if by chance or by accident they know who they are, the World Customs Organization. Well, there would be a lot of things to say about this organization, but again, it's about the contradiction. So you should first control your border. At the same time, you should make room for all those stakeholders who have a stake in crossing these borders, and this is in the interest of everyone. So that's contradictory. About their goals, they have to facilitate the movement of goods, but they should also have an appropriate risk management. So you see, it's well, ideally it should be easy for goods to cross the border, but there is a risk management issue, which means that some of these goods are dangerous, or could be dangerous, or could be unfit due to a number of regulations, national regulations. And there are quite a number of examples of that in the international trade agreements. There are a number of provisions about this type of goods, which should be or should not be allowed to cross the border because of particular regulations, specific regulations. And I mean, what is very popular in the collective memory is, sorry about that. We all do this from time to time, yes, all right. What is very popular is the hormones fed chicken, beef, etc. In the Americas, which are banned from entering the European Union, and especially France, actually. So this is a contradiction. In a way, you want to develop trade, and at the same time, you know that there are some goods which are unhealthy or unacceptable or culturally unacceptable by some people, like possibly pork in Muslim countries, for example. So they also want to prevent and fight the spread of the virus. Well, the spread of the virus, they of course have nothing to do with the origin of the virus and developing research about how it came out and how we could get rid of such coronavirus in the long run, etc. They just have to fight the spread of the virus. And they also have to safeguard the supply chain continuity. Well, that's a problem because, again, if the supply chain is to be maintained, then the likeliness of the spreading of the virus is great. So what they do to reach such ends, contradictory ends, they change the classification reference for the COVID medical supplies, and they facilitate the importation and exportation of protective garments, test kits, medical tools, drugs, and whatsoever. So they have a list And you see also what is important about international organizations, they have lists, they make lists of things which are encouraged, things which are recommended, things which are forbidden, things which enjoy a priority, etc. And this precise list help people who are civil servants, policemen, custom men, etc. somewhere to implement these guidelines at the very least and these rules at the best when they can or when they have to, when they are facing, for example, the tentative export of endangered species. And so they have also to refer to the Convention on Endangered Species, etc. All this is part of their activity. So they play a big role in making people and goods and services move from one country to the others. To sum up, these organizations we have seen have some impact on health issues, and they can help recover from a health crisis because some of their activities is directly connected to a pandemic, for example. Even the most trivial one, like cruise with passengers having fun in the Caribbean. And so in the end, they collaborate among themselves, and they also build together some sort of a response to the crisis. But there are other organizations which are actually directly addressing health issues that we shall see in the next session. So for today, we are going to stop and now trying to discuss together, have a chat, and see what's your demand for a clarification or for a compliment or whatsoever. So Stuart, I'm yours.
Okay, there was one other question that came in that was interesting regarding the differences between the ICAO and IATA. What are the other goals of the ICAO? Well, you kind of touched upon it when you started the outlining the different organizations.
Yeah, IATA is an organization which is supposed to protect the interests of the business in in aviation, like the companies, for example. So I give you an example. If someone is upgraded on board a plane from one carrier on a line, on a trip from, say, Frankfurt to Montreal, then inspector from IATA can at some point pick this person and then sue the company because they did not respect the protocol to upgrade such person. I mean, this was some sort of favor granted by the flight attendant to someone. So there was a time when you could just travel, probably throughout you have experienced this once or twice, you could travel, and at some point, because of a mess, the airport delay flights which were just postponed or whatsoever, I mean, you were in trouble, or because there was some sort of too much reservations made for the people boarding, and then you would be upgraded in business or whatever. And then at that point, there was a period of time where this was systematically done. And then after a while, there was a IATA regulation saying you cannot do this because, you know, it's an attempt at the rules of free, fair competition. Because if you are very generous in upgrading people, then people will be attracted by your company. They will pay for coach tickets, and they will pray for some incident to have them be upgraded in the upper class. And so they sanctioned this by now. They are very much keen at having inspectors inspecting, and so you never know who the inspector is, of course. Someone who pays these tickets as anyone that seats in coach or business or whatsoever. So the companies are very much aware of that, and they fear that they will sanction for that. That's what IATA does, trying to have some sort of fair competition between the companies, the carriers, and also to put some pressure on the governments, for example, and airport authorities, like they have slots where they can land or from which they can take off, and so the negotiations of the slots and where they are actually located and how far they are from the center of gravity of the airport or the customs whatsoever, all this is negotiated. And also again, you have to make some sort of to make sure that the competition between the companies will be fair, and for example that the national, like Air France in France or like Air India in India, etc., are not going to be privileged by the local authorities. So that's what IATA does. IATA is really about the fair competition between the carriers within the business, putting some pressure to make sure that the competition is going to be fair, etc. They don't do anything about safety. If they do, it's just, it's a side effect. So, for example, they will say that the ICAO just set a new regulation, and so what will be the response of the business? Will the business be able to, for example, make sure that critical operation will come, like repatriating people during the COVID crisis, people who were far from home and that had to be repatriated, and what kind of people? I know one country, and I'm going to name it, where there are local branches of the ruling political parties in the country, and they have a stake in the national air career. And so because of that, they are shareholders, actually. Because of that, they are able to privilege the people abroad who are allegedly supporting their party against those who are not. So that's unfair. And, of course, both ICAO and IATA should do something about it if they were aware of that. So that's the division of labor between the two, but one is public, intergovernmental, and the other is private, it's a lobby.
But what we're going to see now with the airline industry is a total shakeout of the industry, because it's going to be impossible to have fair competition if airlines are having to be bailed out. And it'll be the national carriers that will be bailed out.
They will be bailed out and by the states. And the states are going to nationalize some of them. But if you take Alitalia, for example, Alitalia is in a poor condition for decades by now. I mean, the number of solutions have been tried out, and none have been efficient. So in the end, the only solution is either to accept the disappearance of the flag from the air, or to buy it out and nationalize the company. Of course, Air France, for example, as the state has quite a large percentage of shares in Air France, which is enough to control its activities. So they could do with this, or they could try to possess the whole capital in order to make whatever they want in time of crisis, and actually to, for example, make sure that some activities like connecting Corsica to the continent would continue. Same with Italy, with Sicily, or whatsoever. I mean, there are public interest. The public interest is that some activities are not to be placed under the fair competition list of activities. They are not merchant activities. They have to just to exist. And so the state has some rationale to intervene and probably to control all that. Now, other companies will, of course, will be bailed out, and because they are too small, because they have been threatened in the past by a competition in which they were losing market shares. I mean, this is an opportunity to reorganize the whole sector. And I'm sure that passengers people who are in the hospitality business who depend on the passengers being transported from one place to the next would be very much comfortable if they think that in the end there is no fair competition because safety comes first. So the problem is with the low-cost companies, actually. You know, if you look at what happened when I was a child, airlines had no class. They just have one service for everyone. I mean, the people who could afford to board a plane were people who were rich enough to have lobster helps during the flight, and mahogany type of wood, wooden panels, etc. And hostesses who were attending their very ultimate desires and whatsoever. I mean, this changed a lot with time. It was good for tourism because quite a number of people could pay very cheap tickets and go to very remote place for sometimes very few days. So you could go from Britain to Thailand for 4 days and come back, and then you will use an extra time when you are in vacation to go to Spain for a week or whatsoever. So this probably is going to change. Now, if I were in the hospitality business, my main concern would be to watch my profit, the rate of profit. Now, if I have the same rate of profit with 10 people who pay higher costs than with 100 who pay lower costs, and if I'm told that the 100 will not be able to travel, or they will have to pay for that higher prices. So in the end, I have more consumers because I keep the 10 who are able to afford high costs, and I have 2 or 3 probably extra people who this time we say, okay, we are going to pay what the price should be in order to have safety, even in the case of health, a pandemic, for example, because of course the aircraft should be upgraded. I mean, the flight attendants should do different things, and probably they should change the flight attendants, the pilots, more often than they did in the past. At the very least, they cannot do, as I'm not going to name any low-cost company, but there are a number of them who assign to their pilots and flight teams a number of hours which are much above whatever you get on, say, Lufthansa, which is not my national carrier, so I can say it, or Swiss, and so that's going to change, of course. The reshuffling of the whole economy of the transportation system will occur. Now, the problem is that what will happen, as you mentioned, in the next 3 months, 5 months, or 12 months, that's the big issue. That's the big issue. And probably states will all pour money into these companies, or some of them, in order to avoid complete bankruptcy of all. Just imagine that, for example, Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airlines, just imagine that the states suddenly is completely disengaged from their future, as well as British Airways, which is the support or the service stakeholder, which makes these companies run. Well, that's not possible. We could not imagine this. But possibly one of the 3 or 2 of the 3 are going to disappear. That's a possibility. Why should we have 3 Gulf companies, both low cost on the one hand, and servicing people who are paying high costs because they can afford them? Well, it's possible that in the long run there will be only one carrier remaining in this area, or others, as in past crises. But it's good for the economy in a way, not for the shareholders of some of these business companies, but it's good for the economy. So my hunch is that people, we have learned in a mass consumption society to pay the least possible amount of money for any type of good or service. So that's the McDonald's hamburger. You start with the basic one, and then it's just a handful of dollars, and you can have a meal anywhere in the world with French fries and a Coke. and that cost is a very low cost. Now, in the end, people should be prepared to buy sandwiches, which are in a way much safer, much more organic, with everything of sustainability is ensured by this type of consumption. In the end, it will cost probably twice as much, but more people than in the past would afford that and would pay for that, because that's the price. When you go to Japan, for example, one of the interesting things in Japan is that every type of item has a cost which is much higher than everywhere else in the world. Why? Because you pay the exact price that you should pay for this item or for this service. Whereas elsewhere, it's either funded partly by the state, there are subventions, or people want to, the margin of profit is really tiny. And sometimes, it's just dumping because you have to get rid of your stock or whatsoever. I mean, quite a number of things, items, goods, services are just sold out because at too low prices. So I guess this is going to change.
Well, it's going to be difficult to see how low-cost airlines can survive, because they won't be able to do very quick turnarounds. There'll be a lot more time being spent on cleaning planes thoroughly before they get back up into the air. They're going to have to change the configuration of planes. You may have to take out the middle seats and so on, and have fewer passengers. So ticket prices will rise.
Then you have one business class. Then you have only one business class. So the problem is that it's probably specialized in providing business class tickets, which will be discounted compared to the business class tickets of the regular companies. That's a possibility. I mean, if I were the CEO of EasyJet or other type of low-cost companies, or Virgin, whatsoever, I would say, well, I'm going to give people an opportunity to buy tickets which are providing them with much more comfortable conditions of flight, but they will have to pay for this. So what you describe is just a business cabin. Anyway, the medium seat not occupied.
There's another question that's come in, basically about the virtual meetings that are taking place like this one. And won't this basically greatly reduce the percentage of business travelers, and that will lead to a significant drop in revenue for airlines once things start up again?
Well, that's a possibility. I guess that once the World Tourism Organization finds out that its virtual webinar can work without having without being confronted to all the difficulties of taking time on the already very tight schedule to board a plane somewhere, and sometimes you don't buy your ticket yourself, so someone does it for you, and in the end you find out that you have to make a stop in Vietnam before reaching that point on the carrier on which you wouldn't put anyone of your own family, because you are not very much confident in their safety procedures whatsoever. I mean, of course, people who can resist this will do it. They will resist this. They will say no. But there will always be people who will travel in business class or even in first class for a short period of time to have a negotiation, an important negotiation in which being face-to-face matter. That's not going to change. I mean, if I cannot meet you in flesh and have some extra dime once the negotiation round is over for a while, until the next morning, for example, and then we socialize, we get along together, and we drink together, we eat together, etc. So if we don't have this, then we won't have any agreement. You know that most agreements at the level of the World Trade Organization, for example, are reached by what they call the being in the Geneva noise. That means that you have cocktails, you go to restaurants together, and you go to restaurants where there are other people. For example, you are negotiating with and it's a very difficult negotiation in which you know that one country is particularly reluctant to accept your views, and so you cannot make progress. And so you invite someone who is close to the representative, the diplomat who is representative of this country, to a nice restaurant, and you have a nice time together. And then it occurs that next table there is someone from the country which you target from the very beginning, and so you start a discussion. And because it's a relaxed, casual type of context, then people can finally be much more prepared the next day to come back to the negotiation table with better intentions. So that is the rule everywhere in the world. Negotiations have to be face to face. You won't go. You're going to. Well, what you can do is just to have some sort of a meeting which is in the procedure. So at some point we have to convene a meeting with people who have this or that responsibility. You can do it on a webinar. Because you already know the people, by the way, most of the time.
I was at a conference in Korea many years ago, and the former Australian Prime Minister John Howard was on the next table, so I kind of understand what you're saying. But the main point for many people, business travelers, when they go to conferences and so on, is that it's the networking function that's important. That you don't get that with webinars.
Yes, networking is of the essence, actually, and also because you need a lot of time to network. I mean, networking is not only being able to pick out someone in the audience of a very large conference. For example, I have to meet that person before the conference ends. Was off. I have a good motivation for that. It's also having no motivation at all and getting along with people because we are in the same place for a same period of time, and well, you are a good fellow, and you offer drinks or whatsoever. I mean, the type of life which makes you popular somewhere, and in the end, it happens that one of the people who are very friendly with you by now, because you were very friendly with them at the very beginning, without any obvious reason to be, are now very, very important in the negotiation process or discussion process. I remember once having been a candidate to an election in an international organization, and so I met a number of people. I didn't know that they had a voting right, actually. And so it was just as I am usually, so a good fellow. So we had a nice time together. Now, when the voting time came, they remembered that I came to them. I didn't know they had voting rights, and I was behaving as very friendly. And so that's something which needs time, a lot of time, because webinars are between this time. There is a schedule, and of course they also have a number of other constraints, like the communication, the quality of the communication channels. This can be improved, of course, by people at the level of the International Telecommunication Union, which do a lot, probably, which does a lot probably by now to make this possible. And so far, it works well. But that's not exactly the same thing as meeting people face to face and knowing each and finding that the other is reliable. I mean, reliability doesn't stem immediately or surge from the fact that we see sometimes people beyond the screen.
Trustworthiness, I suppose.
Trustworthiness, yes. Trustworthiness. That's a better word. Yeah. More appropriate. Yes, trustworthiness. Yes.
We have one more question, and this question is regarding one of your slides regarding the World Customs Organization, and that it's helping in the fight against the virus. But what are they doing? What are some of the concrete steps they're taking? And you mentioned that it's facilitating the import-export of protective gear and so on.
Yeah, you can see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are a number of regulations. Sorry, not full screen. Yeah, okay, I put it in full screen. There are quite a number of regulations which come from the World Trade Organization, for example, are from national authorities because they want to check the conformity of any cargo which is imported to the national rules of safety, security, etc. For example, because containers can be searched, for example, by Interpol or by the local police, or etc. So, of course, this takes time. It takes time, and there are countries in which, for various reasons, especially towards other countries which are identified as being countries with which there is some sort of conflict or a feud at the time, which are quite slow in doing this. So crossing a border can be easy, or it can take a long period of time, and it can also requires a lot of effort, and sometimes it can cost a lot because you have to pay intermediaries, middlemen, who will facilitate the whole process, and who knows the people, and who knows the context, and who knows the local rules. Otherwise, you won't achieve any end. So this is exactly what is suspended for a while, but not for everything. It's suspended for any type of item which is related to the COVID crisis. So there are, for example, in the list, if you look at the list, where the list is? No. I have the list somewhere. The type of equipment that you may need in a country in which the virus is very active and that is produced elsewhere should arrive quickly, as quickly as possible. So custom control should be relaxed. That's the very idea. So for a number of items, the controls are relaxed, but it's provisional, and it's specific. So it's not going to last forever, and it's not going to apply to other goods in the meantime. So just for that, that's the answer. So that's something they can do, and of course, believe me, it's really very, very effective, because I give you just one example. At the level of the World Trade Organization, there are regulations to facilitate trade. It's called a trade facilitation negotiation, and they are trade facilitating procedures. It's not only about not paying custom taxes for a number of goods once the agreement is signed by both countries. It's also not having trade hampered by any type of pretext. So facilitating trade means, for example, that if a plane takes off in China and goes to Dubai, so it leaves Beijing and goes to Dubai with whatever as a cargo, and then make a stopover in Delhi. And in Delhi, there is an inspection by the customs, and the custom officers say something like, well, it's not consistent with Indian local regulations. So at that point, there will be a long period of discussions, debates, exchange, etc., in order to let this damned cargo takes off and reaches, in the end, Dubai, which is its final destination. That's a way to make free trade difficult, despite the commitment made by the countries, all the countries, to the principle of free trade. So you have to make sure that these countries will facilitate this the trade of such or such good. And what the customs, the World Customs Organization does is that, again, is as a fair competition among those who are members of the IATA or the ICAO. Here it's again about fair trade. So let's merchandise as a pass, as planned and forecasted in the text that had been signed by all countries involved. and facilitate. And who is the facilitator? The World Customs Organization.
But that seems to overlap with the World Trade Organization because, and also, maybe bilateral agreements between two specific countries or whatever.
No, they work together. I mean, the World Customs and the World Trade work together because, the WTO as such has no a priori way to avoid this. The only thing is that they are now reaching a point where the trade facilitation agreement is going to be respected by quite a number of countries. So this won't happen again. But when it happened, and when it could continue to happen sometimes from time to time, then who would be in charge of checking that there is nothing of the kind which prevent the implementation of the agreement? The World Customs Organization, and only this organization, not the local customs, not national governments, although they are members of the WTO and they signed these agreements. The only thing that the WTO can do is already a lot. They can just allow the country which is the victim of this, for example, China or the Emirates, to retaliate against, let's say, India in that case, or threaten to retaliate, and they just set the amount of retaliation in terms of money, which would be allowed in any field. And so, for example, drugs which are produced low cost in India will now have to be taxed 10 times more than they were in the past, until India eventually accepts to lift the type of inspections and the type of conditions set beyond the agreement itself. That's the way it works. So these organizations are compelled to work closely together.
Okay, I think we've run out of time, actually. That time is up. Maybe one last question, if possible. In your presentation, you've kind of touched upon hospitality organizations, business organizations that are involved. The hospitality industry seems to have moved very slowly in terms of asking for bailouts, unlike the airline industry. And they seem to have been quite passive in the way they've approached things. Do you have any thoughts on that? We've seen leading hoteliers like Arne Sorensen and the Hilton CEO going to the White House to lobby with President Trump for bailout funds. A lot of hotels have had to close their doors. The similar sort of situation that airlines are facing.
Yeah, well, the problem is that they are much less organized than airlines are. And you see this when you look at the variations in the format, the perimeters, and the nature of the stakeholders, hotels and restaurants and resorts and casinos and whatsoever. Or, I mean, you can have different lobbies, and they change names. That's also an interesting phenomenon. They of course, any international organization, including intergovernmental ones, do the same. They change names because there is a good reason to, for example, add an adjective to their activity, to what qualifies their activity, etc. And also because something is obsolete and so on, or they want to actually put the stress on one particular mission, part of their mandate. But in the hospitality business, when I tried to investigate for this particular purpose, for preparing this course, well, it seemed to me that this is quite anarchical. There are too many business organizations, and they seem to be not overlapping, but sometimes competing with each other, and they don't seem to be very much funded. They are not having websites which are really appealing and attracting the attention of people not only like us, but people who have responsibility in the business. And so of course, probably that this is linked to what you said about Hilton company and others as well, Intercontinental or whatsoever. I mean, they prefer to negotiate directly with the government of their home state to get funds instead of trying to be associated to the negotiations, which will take a long time before reaching a point where a new guideline, a new recommendation, a new resolution will be out and prepared to be implemented at their level, which will take years. By now, I mean, it's a question of days or weeks or months, but a question of years. So they are lagging behind the timeline, which was that of the companies involved in the airline business, or even probably in the pharmaceutical companies, much more organized than hospitality business is. So I don't know what the answer is. That's more your field than mine. But I guess that what I can see as someone who assesses different sort of networks, that the proportion of the private input into the final in this is much lower than what we find in other fields. I'm sure that, for example, if you think of phytosanitary items, products, those that are used in agriculture, to increase the yield, agricultural yield on the fields, well, there they are very much organized, and they are much centralized, much more centralized than in the hospitality business. So probably for a number of those who are attending this course this morning, a good way to make a living in the future would be to try to organize this hospitality business better as it is by now.
And have a more coordinated approach as an industry, I think.
Exactly.
Do we have time for one last question? There's one last question on the
as you wish,
on the chat, which is basically saying that as the lockdowns ease, business picks up again. Isn't there a risk of a second wave, which could be greater than even the first wave?
Well, nobody knows. Nobody knows. The only I can say is that because we are informed by a number of unexpected facts, which were completely unpredictable, and because of the solutions found, we are probably better equipped to face a second wave, even if the virus is mutating whatsoever, but because mutation can be either more dangerous or less dangerous, when people don't know. But in the end, we are much more prepared by now. So that means that the virus will still be dangerous, a little more, a little less, but it will still be dangerous. It could come back. There probably won't be any vaccine against this virus, or which would be sure enough and accessible to all in time, etc. But one thing is sure, that we have now more tools to face it, and we know it better. So that's not a great encouragement, but it means that I put it differently. I mean, the problem for the hospitality business is that will people be prepared to take risk, to do things that they think are valuable to them, like going to visit a museum somewhere, an exhibition, big exhibition, going to attend a concert, performance, dancing performance or whatsoever, somewhere, going to spend a few days of leisure in a particular place, going to places like Las Vegas and Macau and play casino whatsoever, having a thalassotherapy. Well, will people who like to do this be prepared to face the major sources of risk that will be on their road for a long period of time. Will I take a plane to go to Japan next October? And the answer is, so far, I don't know. But the more people tell me that if I met the virus somewhere, then I would be cured easily or quickly, and I will recover 100%, then, of course, I can take the risk. The problem is the uncertainty. The enemy here is uncertainty. Now, the uncertainty is reduced. We're going to see this in the next session anyway. Yeah. Reducing uncertainty.
Okay, and that's the next session is at the same time on Thursday. So I think with that, we'll wrap up this session.
Okay.
Yves, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Stuart. Thanks Michael. Thanks, everyone.